Hi there. Let's do the mic check. We'll wait for some people to get here. By the way, I'm still working on how to flip this on YouTube. How's everybody doing? All six of you. I'm breaking in a new boonie hat. It is of Italian issue. I thought I would take a break from listening to the radio because I don't care about The Bachelor. By the way, I'm filling in for John and Ken tomorrow. And then I'm on with Gary for Gary and Shannon on Friday. And Gary and Shannon, I think most of next week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. July 4th is Wednesday. On July 4th, I'm John and Ken again. And then after that, I'm back to Gary and Shannon for next week. So anyway, a confusing and busy schedule. By the way, Kennedy is in LA, and so Monday night we'll do Kennedy in Suits on her show. Kennedy on Fox will be from Santa Monica, and so that'll be a live show. So I'll be in studio with her first time on her show instead of flying to New York, which like there's no fucking way. It's interesting because I was seeing there's a guy that I follow, an angry staff officer, and why do you cover John and Ken but are never on John and Ken? Do they hate you? I can only assume so, right? I mean, I've been covering for them for 10 years, right? And in all that time, and remember when I used to follow them and do 7 to 10, I think I talked to John once. They were doing their 20th anniversary or something like that, and he had he had a thumb drive, and he was talking about how every show they've ever had was on this thumb drive. And besides that, when it was me and Kennedy, they liked her, so we would cross over and talk. But otherwise, I mean, like to this day, I can walk down the hall, and you do that uncomfortable walking down the hall. You're each going to pass, and the most I get is, hey, But anyway, they don't like anyone but me filling in for them, so there's that. So anyway, it was interesting. A debate was cranking up today about at this time in 1940, did Hitler really intend to invade England? And there's a lot of people who will sit there and say, well, no, actually, if you know anything about Hitler, no, there's no way the landing would have succeeded. It would have been ugly, but of course the Germans did intend to attempt a landing and to conquer England. And I don't sit here and use other sources except primary historic sources for this. By the way, there's 3 books. If you want to read anything about the Battle of Britain, the 3 must-read books are Peter Townsend's. I know this is backwards. I get it, but Peter Duel of Eagles is firsthand. He was a he was a section leader and then a squadron leader in the Battle of Britain. And his, admittedly, his focus, was like this, but the Battle of Britain, the aerial defense of Britain, which prevented the Germans from landing, was a focus thing. Another excellent book is With Wings Like Eagles by Michael Korda. Very, very good. You can get this used on Amazon. Um, and the one, if you want a really, really good overview that is eminently readable, it's this one, A Summer Bright and Terrible by David Fisher. It really, really, really is excellent. It covers the prehistory in the 30s of Britain basically being disarmed and underfunding the RAF, and it makes the point that the chap who was the head of fighter command when the war started, uh, Sir Hugh Dowding, as played by Laurence Olivier in the movie Battle of Britain. This chap here, this old bastard, Hugh Dowding, you could make a pretty strong case that he literally saved Western civilization for a couple reasons. He lobbied for the Spitfire to be funded and built by 1940. When it was brought to his attention as the head of fighter command in the early and mid 30s that British scientists had discovered that a really weird thing happened when an aircraft flew between two radio towers, that the signal was interrupted briefly, and that they theorized that if the signal was interrupted, energy travels in waves, it had to go somewhere, and that it was very possible that you could detect that radio wave bouncing off the plane. And Hugh Dowding funded it. He was shown a demonstration. He became a believer. And so he funded the invention of what the British called RDF. The British, one big inaccuracy in the movie The Battle of Britain is that the British didn't call it radar until until calling it radar. The British called it RDF, radio direction finding. And Hugh Dowding funded it. So now he had two amazing advantages. He was going to have this world-class fighter, the Spitfire, just in time for the Battle of Britain. He was going to have radar, but what good is radar if you don't do anything with the information, right? And this guy was such a genius, he realized my people are going to be flooded with information because of this radar. And so I need a system to manage the information. I need to disseminate the reporting stations. They need to report higher up, and they need to filter out the crap and send the good information higher up and higher up. And that's how you got the Fighter Direction Center. So those famous scenes where the women are moving the little model planes around the model. So Hugh Dowding did those three things. He funded the Spitfire. He believed the technicians when they said that there was a possibility that planes could be detected at great distance. And then third, he did something with the information. So anyway, so the debate that people are having is, well, did Hitler really intend to invade England? Well, look, it's really, really clear that he did. Another great source is the British captured a map of the German concept of operations for what they called Sea Lion, Seelöwe. And the Germans were very serious about crossing the Channel. Basically at Calais, at the narrowest part, between England and France, and actually crossing, the men would cross in the assault boats, which we would never ever think of. You don't take those, LCIs and things like that. You don't take landing craft across the Channel. But the German concept was going to be that a tug would tow barges full of troops. Assault ships would land on the beaches, but the big picture would be that the Germans would capture ports, and that they would utilize the ports to offload troops. And so that's a different style of amphibious warfare that we really didn't employ in World War II, except for the very start of the North Africa campaign. There were several times fairly ill-fated attempts to take fixed defended ports. That's why you don't try to assault ports, because they tend to be well defended. Which, by the way, The Saudis discovered that 2 weeks ago when they tried an amphibious assault on the port of Hodeidah. It didn't take a lot for the Houthis to hit the landing craft and cause dozens of casualties. So our concept was always to hit beaches. The Germans' concept was to hit beaches initially, but also it was a substantial parachute assault. And one of the first goals of the parachute assault would be the ports. Another primary source, if you're wondering, did Hitler really intend to invade England? Well, you know who knows Hitler's mind better than anyone else? Hitler. These are translations of all of his war directives, and or Führerbefehl, and in this case, number 16 was the invasion of England. Führer Order number 16. This is what Hitler wrote. No, he would his staff people would write, the order, and then Hitler would sign it. But this is what Hitler wrote on 16 July 1940 at Führer headquarters, Directive number 16 on preparations for a landing operation against England. Quote, since England, in spite of her hopeless military situation, shows no signs of being ready to come to an understanding, I have decided to prepare a landing operation against England and, if necessary, to carry it out. The aim of this operation will be to eliminate the English homeland as a base for the prosecution of the war against Germany and, if necessary, to occupy it completely. I therefore order as follows. 1. The landing will be in the form of a surprise crossing on a wide front from about Ramsgate to the area west of the Isle of Wight. Units of the Air Force will act as artillery and units of the Navy as engineers. The possible advantages of limited operations before the general crossing, e.g. the occupation of the Isle of Wight, are to be considered from the point of view of each branch of the armed forces and the results reported to me. I reserve the decision to myself. Preparations for the entire operation must be completed by the middle of August. These preparations must also create such conditions as will make a landing in England possible vis-a-vis number 1, the English Air Force must be so reduced morally and physically that it is unable to deliver any significant attack against the German crossing. B, mine-free channels must be cleared. So anyway, bottom line, it was his intention by August to be prepared for a landing if Britain didn't surrender or at least capitulate and give Hitler the so-called free hand in Europe that he wanted. It is true that Hitler didn't want to occupy England. He didn't want to fight England. He wanted England to stop fighting. But you know how they are. So the limited operations that he was talking about would be the possibility of occupying the Isle of Wight and then using it as an aircraft carrier, you see. So anyway, so that's just a curious thing. When people try to second guess Hitler, which is stupid because he wrote everything down. If it wasn't in Mein Kampf, then in wartime, it was in his directives. So I would just highly recommend going to the primary sources. Again, I'm not a history professor, but I trained as a historian. I was trained as a historian at the Washington State University, which, by the way, has one of the greatest World War II archives in the entire world, including the field manual for the Model 1919 A4 vehicle-mounted 30 caliber machine gun. Sorry, it's backwards. So what's going on in Gaza right now is the Palestinians are continuing their campaign of incendiary kites and other things like that. They have said that Thursday there's a big surprise coming for Israel, that on Thursday they're intimating somehow that there's going to be some gigantic monster kite assault or something like that. We don't know. Generally, they overpromise and they underdeliver, but undoubtedly, something will happen on Thursday. In Iran, in Tehran, the protests continue. And so here it is Wednesday. So in 48 hours on the holy day, will the protests continue? We don't know. But the Iranians are taking this very, very seriously. like they did in 2010 when Obama was president. Guten Abend, meine Freunde. Es tut mir leid. Es tut mir leid, Deutschland football. If none of you know this, Germany not only lost to Korea today, but they're eliminated from the World Cup. So the worst performance by Germany in Russia since 1944. Anywho, in Tehran, they are continuing to protest, and what the IRGC does, what the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps does, is they bring Iranian security forces from around the country to Tehran. Because one of the problems that they had in 2009 was that when they used security forces from Tehran, they had the same problem that the Chinese did in 1989, that there were a lot of police and all that who were a little too close to the protesters, maybe related to them, or, because in Iran, the army is drafted and some of the police forces are drafted as well. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, the elite, they will take draftees. They will take your good, outstanding draftees. But the one inescapable thing is that people close to Tehran have ties to the residents of Tehran. Whereas if you pull in a militiaman from the far east of Iran, chances are he doesn't even speak Farsi. There's a really strong chance that nobody in the crowd, that the security guys from the far east will not understand the chants. They won't understand what people are saying, and that worked in 2009. Dialects of Urdu or Urdu. Normally found in Pakistan, and so the Iranians love those guys. Now the issue is in the far east of Iran right now. The Saudis, and this is something that Saudi intelligence does very well. The Saudis just basically stood up a terror group and based them in Pakistan and called them the New Islamic Helper Front, the New Dawn Nusra Front, and all this. And it's like a whole cloth invented Saudi terror group, to do nothing but operations into Iran. And so they have hit Iranian police stations and army bases and things like that. And what they're attempting to do is sort of put pressure on Iran. The Iranians, of course, are the primary sponsor of what's going on in Yemen with the Houthi rebellion. And so the Saudis are trying to give them a bit of their own medicine and giving them a insurgent group or a terror group along their border and seeing how the Iranians respond. So that's going on. In the middle of that, you have a bunch of people protesting in Tehran about the excesses of the mullahs, their seizure of mansions and villas, and their corruption is being documented in Iran by sort of underground journalists, citizen journalists, and so a lot of people are very, very dissatisfied. Also, of course, what precipitates this is that the Iranian economy is in a really, really, really bad way, in a really terrible way. And the government used to subsidize cooking oil, cooking gas, flour, bread, things like that. So those subsidies went away, and a lot of people are obviously, they're stretched pretty thin. In that part of the world and lots of Asia, the government will subsidize cooking oil and things like that. Those are staples. For us here in the West, your wife or your mother doesn't go out and buy flour every day. You go out and buy cooked bread or what, but you don't buy bread every day anyway. You buy bread once or twice a week, maybe. And then that's just to make sandwiches. How many of you use oil for everything you cook? Well, in that part of the world, from the entire continent of Africa, most of the Middle East, you know, all the way to China, people go through a lot of cooking oil to cook their staples, which are overwhelmingly legumes and vegetables. As people get richer, there's more meat, but basically beans, rice, and other vegetables are what people are cooking, every day. Yes, for breakfast, and so it's a big issue in Iran. The cooking oil is no longer subsidized. It's in little details like that you start to understand a lot more about how these societies operate. So there's that. Someone just said. Um, Someone just said that. The guy on the 110. I guess he did a backflip onto an air cushion. Okay, so the 110, I guess, is going to be open. So Justice Paul Kennedy is retiring on July 31st. That's interesting. That would certainly mean something for the midterms. And what did I say, Paul? Anthony Kennedy. Interesting. Very interesting. He's he's a moderate liberal, but he's a liberal. I mean, kind of, sort of. He's a Reagan appointee, as we know. He was a guy when Robert Bork went through what he went through, and was not confirmed. I remember that was as I was winding up college. I remember that was it the summer, watching the Bork hearings, and when he was deemed too darn conservative, and he failed to get the Senate Judiciary's approval to go to a larger vote of the Senate, then Reagan appointed Kennedy. So he generally votes with the conservatives. It depends on what the issue is, but he would him leaving. Obviously he's retiring now because Trump is the president. So Trump is going to nominate another conservative to replace him, or maybe someone even more conservative. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, if you don't know this, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is on her last legs. She is hanging on. Apparently, when the night of the election on November 8th of 2016, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was inconsolable because she had intended to retire. And then Hillary Clinton was going to nominate another liberal to replace her on the Supreme Court. When Trump won, people close to her have said that she was absolutely gobsmacked, just completely crestfallen. Someone, by the way, who's extremely close to Ruth Bader Ginsburg is Nina Totenberg of NPR. Nina Totenberg has been around forever in NPR. She's their judicial and Supreme Court reporter. She is tight with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I mean, like unprofessionally tight, really, really close to the notorious RBG. And she's let it slip that RBG has no intention of retiring until Trump is defeated. Well, I mean, look at her. I mean, just look at her. She falls asleep during the State of the Union. That's when Obama was president, right? She has a couple glasses of wine, and then she can't stay up for the State of the Union. So anyway, Kennedy has mellowed over the years, but he's still a conservative. He's still you can count on him to be part of the 5 conservative majority, exactly like yesterday and the rulings today, the 5-4 rulings today. Yesterday, the Trump travel ban was upheld, and we knew it would be. Today, and this is huge news here in California, but today the Supreme Court uh, basically knocking down a union's right to compel its members to pay dues that go to political advertising and political contributions. This is the one thing that keeps the California Assembly hostage to public sector unions. Remember Schwarzenegger at the end of his first term had those three measures on the ballot, and they all failed because the unions went crazy and um, they spent millions defeating those measures. A couple fun facts if you don't know this, and also by the way, it's funny how all of a sudden there was the whatchamacallit ruling, the ruling that political speech is free, or political donations is free speech. And a lot of liberals went crazy about that and said, no, money's money, it's not free speech. Well, funny now, all of a sudden today, they're suddenly discovering that political contributions are free speech or whatever. Um, I forgot. How come I forgot the name of the ruling? But anyway, here's some fun facts. We're reconnecting. Okay, we in 2018, the majority of unionized workers in America work for government. By and large, unions were very successful in getting workplace reforms. The reasons that unions formed was because the workers of the world, were being exploited by those damn capitalists. And so mines were unsafe, factories were unsafe. Okay, we know that, right? We all read that history. What happened was unions were so successful in changing that and creating things that we have today, like OSHA, the Office of Safety and Health or Administration, whatever, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Because of OSHA regulations, it's a OSHA regulation that a 12-year-old can't go into a coal mine, or work on an assembly line. Unions were so successful that the reasons for unions began eroding when government power was completing the union demands. So here we are in a situation where 100 years later, after union workplace demands about the length of the workday and all that, and worker safety. So 100 years later, the majority of unionized employees are government workers. So we're paying them, and they're in a union. What does that union agitate for? Are they being abused by the government? That's a California state unionized employee. It's for collective bargaining. That's what it is. But its other function, and the secret second function of every union in California, every government union, is to fund candidates that will continue to give them raises and give them bennies and the whole thing. We all know this. The state prison guard union, the only reason they exist is because they feather their nest, they protect themselves, they support candidates who will support regular pay raises for them and the whole thing. So I mean, wouldn't that be amazing? This is the ultimate dichotomy between private sector and public sector unions. In the private sector, your union is in collective bargaining with your employer. The employer makes their own money, and the difference between what they spend and what they make is the profit. Out of the profit, they have to pay shareholders if it's a public company, and they have to pay the employees, right? A reasonable wage. Well, the essential difference between government union employees and private employees is that the government is not playing with its own money. They're playing with your money and my money. Okay, so when they get into collective bargaining, they're trying to stay within their budget. But here in California, as we know, there's no such thing as staying within our budget. So this is a big deal here in California, where we have the world's largest two retirement funds, CalPERS and CalSTRS, and then on top of that, we have this bloated infrastructure of government employees here in California. And dig, if you will, this picture, okay? Never mind city or county or federal. Never mind them. In California, 1 out of 100 residents work for the state. Okay, so one in 100. Now factor into that the city and the county, and what you have are about 14 out of 100 Californians work for state or lower government. Federal government, it's a way different deal. Most of them are not unionized, and besides, it's not not my money. I mean, it's my money because I'm paying federal taxes. But I like how the federal government runs their employees. The state of California, the Democrats discovered that if you throw some chips and some bones at the state employee unions, what you get back is 10 times in return. They will pay for your reelection. They will also run ads against your opponent. The whole thing. Those are the arrows in the union quiver. Is that they can establish a PAC or whatever, and you need look no further than the electricians that work at Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. I mean, those guys. It's like they have secret video or something on Garcetti and the LA City Council. And so the ruling today, and I have to read it a little later on, but effectively it says that a union cannot compel, beyond dues, a union cannot compel workers to contribute to political campaigns and all that. I might be a little off on that, but anyway. So I'm at 32 minutes, so I'll tell you what, we'll cut this one short unless there's some questions for the good of the order. I have to go record a podcast. Running a sales contest with one of my big chain stores here in SoCal. Can you recommend a good shooting school as a prize for the salespeople? I forgot the name of it. If you call Matthew at Tactical Tailor, he's got a couple. I don't know. Yeah, I've heard about that from. I've heard that Covered 6 is good too. I don't know of any. I actually live close to a place to shoot, which is there on Francisquito, and I've seen some private coaching there. Ich bin richtig. I'm a righty. In Germany, I'll tell you this. I wouldn't be AFD. I wouldn't be Alternative für Deutschland, but I'd be really close. These days, anyway. I would not. I'd be doing whatever it takes to defeat Angela Merkel, the East German chemist, the Aussie. But Germany will be way better off without Angela Merkel. But otherwise, shooting, it's funny because of where I live. I have a berm made of dirt and cedar shavings, and so I can run my own pistol course, and then I can shoot the 22 all over the place here, and I can shoot 300 blackout. I can shoot everything except JDAMs, and so it's funny because I save a lot of time and money not having to go to Little Tahunga, which is it's a terrific place to shoot, and then the place at San Francisquito is a really good place to shoot too. But it's nice being able to just go there, and then doing the pew pew, and then coming back and cleaning it. So. I just converted all my ARs and my Tavor to featureless. Very happy. Thoughts on actual percentage? I bet you, because most Californians who legally own ARs are law-abiding, they're taking advantage of us, and the majority of us will. How do you make a Tavor featureless, though? Well, and here's the thing. I'm a lefty. I'm left-handed. And so I almost bought a Tavor, but you have to specifically, they lie to you when they tell you that you can just change the bolt to a left-hand eject. No, you can't. You cannot. Yeah, I have to. As far as the fin grip goes, I need I need to put I need to put that back in there, and then I'm fine. My my CQR, by the way, made in Deutschland from Hera, Hera. Um, so when I put that in there, um, or yeah, a flash hider or I think can't you just leave it bare threads, or put on a thread protector. Um, but yeah. Uh, so let's see what else for the goodly order. And I forgot. Um, oh, was it? I'm reading. Of course, um, reading reading about Allied special operations, like the book Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Then all of my different first special service books, which are right below here. But this is an interesting one. Very you Germans would like this. This is Kommando. It's Wehrmacht um, Spezialkräfte. It's a German special forces in World War II. Really good book. Really interesting. Um, yeah, 12 strong. You know what? It's movie making. It got a bit too corny for me. It is an excellent book. Yeah, it was hard to watch, uh, and so I literally got about an hour and a half into it, and I didn't watch the last 20 minutes or whatever it was. But I mean, it's I'm sure it's fine. But I did one of those rental things where started it and oh, by the way, if you know your Stalin history, there is a hilarious movie that just came up on Netflix and Amazon last night, on Tuesday night. Death of Stalin, right? It's got Jeffrey Tambor as Georgy Malenkov. It has Steve Buscemi as Khrushchev, and he's excellent. It is so good. And I don't know the English actor who plays Lavrenti Beria, the hated head of the NKVD. But here's what's crazy about the movie: it is funny. It is about the period when in 1953 when Stalin died, and the days and weeks before Khrushchev emerged as the top dog, and um, Death of Stalin is hilarious. And the guy who plays Zhukov, um, is I forgot his name. English actor. Uh, he was the bad guy in The Patriot. Um, I forgot his name in The Patriot, but he was playing a real life British asshole, a British cavalry commander by the name of Banastre Tarleton. Who, if you ever want a villain in the Revolutionary War, the only senior ranking British officer who was not invited to the honorary victory dinner. Cornwallis and his entire staff came to this, thanks for fighting, go back to England dinner. The only guy not invited was a British cavalry commander named Banastre Tarleton, Tarleton. He was a right bastard. And it's interesting because if you look back on what he did in South Carolina and all this, he was a shithead. He was a brass-plated fuckface. But as a counterinsurgent, the guy was 200 years ahead of him of his time because he had absolutely no rules. He would burn churches with people in it, the whole fucking thing. And he would snuff out rebellion in North Carolina and South Carolina. He was a complete bastard. Anyway, the guy that played him in The Patriot, Jason Isaacs, thank you. He plays Zhukov in this movie, The Death of Stalin, and I'm going to rewatch it. It was so dense. I turned the just because I couldn't miss a word of it. Um, I turned the subtitles on. It's all in English. It's fine, but I would um, uh, I would absolutely, if I were you, read up on the transition from Stalin to Khrushchev. Just do yourself a favor and go on Wikipedia and just Google Khrushchev or Stalin. But it's excellent. It is really good, and it's also really really funny. So, Death of Stalin, and yeah, like Armstrong said on Netflix, Fauda is excellent. 2 seasons are up. It's an Israeli series. The guy who plays the main guy, actually in the IDF, he was in a unit, just like it's depicted in the show. Fauda is Arabic for chaos, and the series centers around an IDF unit that goes in deep cover and operates in the West Bank and Gaza as Palestinians. They can go into complete biological cover. They can they blacken their beards and mustaches. They're all unaccented Arabic speakers. They're all Israel has loads and loads of guys who speak unaccented Arabic, and the show is in Hebrew and Arabic, and it's kind of, if you don't know, one of the subtleties of the show is when they switch from Hebrew to Arabic. It sounds a lot alike to us, but if you have an ear for Arabic, you know when they're doing it. And generally, if they're operating undercover, they're speaking Arabic. But I highly recommend you watch Fauda with subtitles. Don't dub it. Do not dub it into English, because if you watch a full episode in English and then you go back and watch it in subtitles, it's like you're watching a separate show. You miss so much if you don't watch it in Hebrew and Arabic with subtitles on. So anyway, it's called Fauda, Fauda. And the other show, again, I love the Norwegian show Occupied, because it's just so subtly done, so plausible. So the in Occupied, the Norwegians discover a renewable energy source that is also clean, right? So before it's perfected, the extremely liberal prime minister announces to the EU that Norway will no longer export natural gas or petroleum. Okay, Norway, is a wildly wealthy country because of the oil offshore. So the super green, progressive, liberal prime minister tells the EU, we're not selling oil anymore. So the EU rises up, takes a vote, and they cut a deal with Russia to administratively occupy Norway and reopen the oil fields. So it's a occupation by any other name, but it's a soft occupation. And so the first season is what gets you up to the full active resistance by the Norwegians and the Russian occupation. Season 2 is a carryover, but they're both good. I would recommend, if you are looking for something to binge watch, Fauda is excellent, and so is Occupied. I would say if you had to make a choice between the two, I would say Fauda. And Fauda is so good. The first couple episodes that I saw, I was communicating with friends of mine in Beverly Hills who used to be in the IDF, and I asked them, have you seen this show? How was this approved to go on TV? Because it seems like they're giving up a lot of operational details. And one of these guys said, well, first of all, that show's 3 years old, and the IDF did originally try to censor it, and the actual first version was not approved because it really did give up a lot of operational details. So somewhere out there is a pilot of Fauda that is practically a how-to, practically a field manual. So Tom Sizemore's real-life character, he was... yeah, his depiction of Colonel Danny O'Neill, I don't know. I hadn't heard any of that. I hadn't heard anything about Danny O'Neill going crazy or anything like that. And I hadn't heard that the Rangers were driving around with dead bodies on the Hoodler vehicles. I'd never ever heard that. So that is interesting. Had not heard that in '93. I know, in '93, uh, that was when the Canadians, when the Canadian Parachute Regiment had their little to do, and it was the end of their regiment because they were loose cannons. They were absolutely loose cannons, and they captured a 16-year-old Somali boy. They beat the living shit out of him. They stuck a wooden dowel up his ass, and you know what? They photographed the whole fucking thing. So the photographs get out. Guys were charged. The entire thing fell apart. Canada's self-image as the world's nice guy, and Canadian peacekeepers as the ray of hope, and all that bullshit that they tell themselves. That was shattered, and the Canadians were so rocked by the reality that the Canadian Army could put guys in the field that could do extraordinary brutality, that the Canadians disbanded the parachute regiment. The Belgians had a problem in Somalia too. Um, but so that's what rather than prosecuting the guys who did it, the Canadians just got rid of their most capable combat unit. But the reality, and this is like a tangent off a tangent off a tangent at this point. But the reality was the Canadian Parachute Regiment had a fatal flaw, and they'd had it for a couple of years. Because I know it's because I have a cousin who's a career Canadian infantry officer. He spent 14 years as a captain um, because they just don't have any upward mobility. But what the Canadians used to do was rather than the parachute regiment selecting its own people, it relied on other units in the Canadian Army to send them guys, to transfer guys to them. So if you had a troublemaker, if you had a bad apple, you sent him off to the paras. Um, uh, so they had an inherent problem of of bad ingredients. In fact, the Canadian Parachute Regiment in 1992, when they were alerted for the Somalia mission, the commander of the regiment recommended that they not be sent, and that earned him a early retirement. He was replaced, and another guy came in and took them to Somalia, where they immediately proceeded to fuck up. So, and by the way, the fucking up is not the taking pictures; it's the fucking up. So there's that. But yeah, Danny O'Neill and the guys involved in Black Hawk Down on October 3rd, 1993. That was the 3rd Battalion of Rangers from Hunter Army Airfield in Georgia, not 1st Battalion at Fort Benning or 2nd Battalion at Fort Lewis. It was 3rd Battalion, and they were sort of they were thought of as the fuck up battalion, and that's a bad way to put it, but they were added after. They were a new battalion, so they were looking for new traditions and all that. Colonel O'Neill had a lot of pressure on him, but I never heard anything about him driving around with dead bodies on the hood of his vehicle and all that. And I everything I know about Danny O'Neill from people who know him is that he was a really, really good guy. Um, and you know what? In the U.S. Army and Cavalry, we never say F Troop, because I was in Echo Troop, 82nd Cavalry in Oregon. I was also in Golf Troop, but the troop, which is a company, and in the cavalry we have companies and squadrons. Pardon me, we have troops and squadrons, not companies and battalions. The troop between E and G is not called that. It's called Troop F. You always say Troop F. You never say F Troop. You never say F Troop. You say Troop F. And they refer to themselves as Troop F. And every single squadron of cavalry in the U.S. Army, aviation and armor cavalry, Echo Troop is E Troop, Golf Troop is G Troop, but the troop between is never ever called by that name. It's Troop F. So that's how that goes. I should clarify, he is a 3-footed dog. He does have all 4 legs. This is one of the legs ends right about here, and there's a little pad. And I don't think he's out. Wyatt. No, he's not. He'd be if he was here. He'd be here. All right. So further questions before we end our broadcast day here at 15 minutes. Can I listen to Gary and Shannon again, or are they still talking to Petros about The Bachelor? So again, if you're just joining us, I'm John and Ken tomorrow. And then on Friday, I'm sitting in for Shannon on Gary and Shannon. So it'll be me and Gary. The rest of the week, on Monday and Tuesday, I'm Gary and Shannon. On July 4th, I'm John and Ken again. And then on the 5th, let me get this straight so that I can get it straight. Let's see. So tomorrow I'm John and Ken. Friday, I'm filling in with Gary. Yeah, then Monday and Tuesday, I am Gary and Shannon. On July 4th, I am John and Ken. And then on Thursday, the 5th, I am Gary and Shannon again. So a little confusing, but you'll hear me a lot on KFI. And I should mention this, by the way. I don't nominate myself for awards. The kind of award shows in LA where you have to nominate yourself, those are, really lame. I'd rather get in the shower. Oh, we jumped around. Measurement of success in radio are ratings, period. That's it. And in the case of KFI, our ratings, the demo that we are looking for are persons, men and women, persons 35 to 54 or 35 to 64. Well, across all of KFI, there's only two that are number one in those demos, and it's Dark Secret Place and Super Hyper Local Sundays. So I took over that show about a year ago. It was like tied for 12th. It's now number one on Sunday nights. So you can take all the awards you want. You can go to all the award shows you want, but if you don't have ratings, then, who cares? Then, that trophy and 10 cents can just, go right up your ass. So, all right. So I'm going to go and do stuff, and as well as junk. And there's a phone. Why is a phone call coming in? I don't care. All right. So thanks for watching, and we will catch ye later.